This week's episode of the Apple Circle podcast is a little special for a couple of different reasons. One is that for our American fans, it is Thanksgiving week with Black Friday and Cyber Monday, so lots of good food and lots of good savings. So happy Thanksgiving to all of those fans in America. And for those of you who are international and abroad, hope you're having a great day. You probably noticed the second special thing about this podcast is that it's out a little early. We usually release these on Fridays, but this week, going a little early just so everybody who's traveling has something to watch or listen to and can enjoy the latest Apple news. But Matt, we find ourselves once again in a conundrum. Where is the news? What is going on? Has Cupertino shut down for the rest of the year?
It seems like it. I mean, really nothing all that new, although there are a few things we're going to be talking about that we haven't mentioned on the podcast yet. But yeah, this is always that time of year where things really slow down, which for good reason. I mean, Apple just released a ton of new stuff. They're taking a break, taking a breather, but that means we just have to figure out what to talk about. But we do have some stuff we're going to talk about at the end. We have our Apple Circle hotline where you can call in, text us, and ask a question about really anything, whether it's the podcast, about tech support, products to buy, any of that. And we have some of those questions, which we'll talk about at the end. But if you want to submit your own, the number for that is 949-354-3508. And you can give us a call, give us a text, and we will answer your question. But I think before we get to that, we want to talk about some rumors. There's some rumors that we have talked about, and then there's some that we haven't covered yet. What are the juiciest rumors that we have going right now?
So right now, sort of as we get to the end of the year, there are a couple of big rumors about what is coming next. We have some iPhone 14 stuff, but surprisingly, info on that has been sparse since like that major John Prosser news dump. Things have been sort of quiet on the iPhone front, but we're learning a lot about new Macs and also sort of iPhone SE 3. So I guess a couple of big rumors here to talk about. New MacBook Air with a big redesign. New iMac Pro with the 27-inch mini LED display. New Mac Mini. And I guess iPhone SE. So is there anything, Matt, in there in particular that's more interesting than the other, or should we just kind of go through sort of highlights? Because we've talked about this before, right?
We've talked about them, but I think the one that we haven't talked about the most is the MacBook Air. We mentioned that we know it's coming. It's a matter of when we did our buyer's guide, which, by the way, speaking of the holidays, if you haven't listened to that episode, we went through a whole buyer's guide for the holidays, not only for Black Friday, but any holiday that you may be buying gifts for, or just buying gifts or buying yourself stuff, whatever. If you want to get a good deal, there's a lot of tips that we have. So we have that podcast. It's a few episodes back, so check that out. But while we were talking about that, we mentioned maybe you shouldn't buy the MacBook Air because we know there's one coming. We've seen these leaks from many different sources, and they all kind of point to the same thing, which is basically almost like a mishmash between the iMac 24-inch, the M1 that we just got a redesign of, and the MacBook Pro. So that means we're going to get kind of a really super slim design with those squared off corners, almost like the iPad or the iMac, like I said. And then also we're going to get colors, very much similar to the iMac that we have now, and also white bezels. But then from the MacBook Pro, we're going to get possibly a notch and the new keyboard and those kind of things, plus all the ports like MagSafe. I'm not sure if they're going to have ports, but it's going to have MagSafe at the very least. But yeah, what else am I missing here? What are we going to see with this MacBook Air?
That's sort of all the big stuff. That's what we know is this big redesign. And what I think is so interesting about this is that I was thinking about this today. The MacBook Air, when it was launched in 2008, was like this very niche product. It was the thin and light laptop. It was this really great Mac. It was really expensive. It wasn't the computer for everyone. It was like more of a niche computer. I think that the MacBook, there was a thing called the MacBook, not the super thin one, just the regular plastic unibody MacBooks. I think they were, weren't they aluminum at one point? Anyways.
Yeah, after the plastic one, they made an aluminum one.
The regular MacBook line, that was like the de facto computer for everyone. So there was the MacBook Pro, and then the MacBook Air, which was sort of its own category leading device. It was thin, it was light, it was for the business traveler, it was whatever it was. That was a special computer. What's so interesting now and what's going to happen with this next gen MacBook Air is that this is the computer for everyone, because not everyone needs the M1 Pro or the M1 Max of the MacBook Pro. And as of right now, if you don't want a MacBook Pro, your only other option is the MacBook Air. And how these rumors sort of point this computer to look in 2022 is it's going to be sort of the de facto computer for everyone. And you're going to get that new design. You're going to get the notch. You're going to get the better webcam, the mini LED display. You're going to get a really solid computer. And it is sort of interesting, just sort of in context, how the MacBook Air has become the computer for like the 5% of Apple elite customers to now the MacBook Air is like, that is the general Mac that I feel like most people these days get.
Oh, definitely. I mean, for a while there, when they did the redesign, not from the original MacBook Air, but when they did the redesign to the one that was around forever, I think they did that in 2012, maybe a little
like
before that. Yeah, I think it was 2012. Either way, it was around for a long time. And during that stint of that design and that computer, well, first of all, they didn't update even the internals very often. But that computer quickly became the most popular Mac, and I think even one of the most popular like computers in general, like in terms of like a single device. And I don't think that's necessarily fallen off. It's just that it's not as exciting anymore. Like it really seemed before, like you recommend the MacBook Air because it's light, it's great for school, it's powerful enough to do everything you need for most people. But now it's like there's a lot more nuance in those options. But I agree, we're kind of coming back to the MacBook Air is going to be the computer for everyone. And it seems like Apple's trying to poise it as that because it seems, at least in my opinion, that they're really trying to differentiate, I think better than they have in the past, between the Pro and the consumer, let's say, computers. These are all pretty much consumer grade, but like you get what I'm saying. So the home everyday computer is going to have colors, possibly going to have white bezels. It's going to be with the regular M1, M2 chips. And then you'll have the Pro line, which doesn't have the colors, but has the much more powerful processors and stuff. And I think it's just adding colors makes it so much easier to differentiate which one should you get. Because right now, if you look at the MacBook Air compared to the MacBook Pro, the M1 versions, not the new MacBook Pro, they look very similar and they perform almost exactly the same. So if they were very confusing for a while there, but I think now they're finally getting to the point where it's going to be very easy to differentiate. And pretty much now I know I'm not going to have to recommend my mom get a $3,000 MacBook Pro. I'm going to say get the MacBook Air and not even think a second time about it.
What's so interesting, too, is that Apple is very particular about their naming scheme. And now you sort of have, at least on the computers, a very clear separation between consumer and pro, like you just said, Matt, because there's Air and Pro. MacBook Air, iPad Air. Are those the only two Airs? There's no iPhone Air. There's no Mac Mini Air. But those are at least the two I could think of as examples. And then you have the Pros on the other end. You have the iPad Pro. You have the MacBook Pro. So that's kind of interesting. And also, it was so interesting to see the renders of the new MacBook Air with the white keyboard, because that just immediately took me back to those original MacBooks. Remember the plastic MacBooks with the white keyboard on there? That also was a really good keyboard, by the way. I cannot remember Apple doing a white keyboard on a laptop since those MacBooks from like 2007, 2008, 2009. It's all been black, right? Now they sort of have the two-tone black color scheme on the MacBook Pro with sort of the keyboard and that sort of, what is it, like the keyboard well, it's all black with the two-tone of the silver space gray. And now you're going to have the white keyboard with the colors on the MacBook Air. I don't know, just interesting to see Apple sort of shift its computer lineup a bit. And I think we're going to settle into a nice space where you have a nice consumer option of all Macs and then a pro option of all Macs. You'll have the MacBook Air, MacBook Pro, iMac Pro, Mac Mini, which is sort of a question mark at this point, and then at the top of the mountain, the all-illustrious Mac Pro that will probably just blow everything else out of the water.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I guess here's a question. I agree with all that. Here's a question, though. I don't know, the rumors point to it being a MacBook Air, but I'm not entirely convinced that this is 100% a MacBook Air, or in the sense that maybe they won't call it the MacBook Air and maybe it'll be the MacBook, only because, I mean, okay, on one hand, yes, the MacBook Air has this kind of appeal and this name recognition where even normal people know what the MacBook Air is. It's the computer that they pretty much want. But at the same time, it's like there is no reason for it to be an Air anymore, except for, I guess, differentiating it by name. But I don't know. I'm just, in the back of my head, I keep thinking like this is actually going to be a MacBook and they're going to go back to the MacBook and the MacBook Pro. Because Otherwise, then why even have, like, why go straight to Pro? I don't know. It's like a half argument, but I'm just, in the back of my head, I'm a little convinced that it's not going to be a MacBook Air.
The naming scheme is so confusing, and I guess it's almost like, why did they name the iPad Air the iPad Air? But I guess it was just because it sort of fell in the middle, so now they're kind of stuck with it. The one reason I think that Apple wouldn't go with MacBook instead, they'll probably go with MacBook Air, is because, speaking of name recognition, not only does the MacBook Air have pretty good name recognition and people know what that is, I feel like the MacBook, ever since that whole disaster with that like weird low-powered Intel mobile chip one, maybe it's just in the tech community, but I feel like people don't remember that computer so fondly. And I feel like maybe it would cause more confusion if there was the MacBook, because then it's like, okay, does the MacBook Air still exist? Is there a MacBook and a MacBook Air? What happened to the MacBook Air? It's a little confusing as to what Apple would do, but I think it makes a lot of sense for them to just simplify everything and do MacBook and MacBook Pro. But I wonder, because of the blunder with that computer not that long ago, if it's just easier for them to keep the branding and the name of just Air and just kind of move forward with that.
Yeah, I mean, I get that, but I think that's mainly a tech community thing that didn't like the MacBook 12-inch. Everyone I know that had one in real life, like my sister had one. I'm trying to think who else. I know John, who we work with, his wife has one, or had one at least. And either way, point being, everyone I know who had one in real life actually loved it. It's just us who knew about computers realized how underpowered that computer was, and it was just not the best. The battery life, I think, was not very good, if I remember correctly. That being aside, I think the reason why they might go MacBook is because, well, here, let's lay out the line after these computers come out. So You're going to have the MacBook Air, this new version, the colorful version that's rumored. You'll have the MacBook Pros up top. So we have the 14-inch and the 16-inch. Are they going to keep around the cheaper MacBook Air, or not? I guess not cheaper, but the older MacBook Air as the quote-unquote cheap computer?
Think so.
You think they're going to just get rid of it?
I think they just got it. They're already in this Apple Silicon transition. I think the Apple Silicon transition has gone so well for them that maybe they keep some Intel SKUs.
No, the MacBook Air is already M1.
Oh, well, retract what I just said. I think they're just going to update it. They've just got to update it and just not keep the M1 around. I think they're just going to do M2. They're going to replace that, and that's going to be the beginning of the line. I
agree. In the back of my head, I feel like this is such a big redesign. It's such a crazy change that it would be. I guess the reason I'm saying maybe they will keep around the MacBook Air that already exists, the M1, is because they need the affordable computer, and this new computer is so different and so probably costly for the development and all that kind of stuff that they're gonna have to charge at least like $1,100, whereas now you can get one for $999 for the MacBook Air that exists. So it's like, it would end up raising the price, I think, unless they just put it at $999, which I guess they could do. But I feel like it would be maybe make a little bit more sense as the cheaper one is now the MacBook Air again, which it used to be, and then you have the MacBook and the MacBook Pro. I can see that happening. I don't know if it will, but that's just kind of in the back of my head what I think might happen.
I'd love to believe it. I just think it's too confusing for people who are just looking to buy a computer. But I do agree that maybe they need to keep that M1 MacBook Air around for the education market, and maybe they don't publicize it, but maybe they just sort of keep it as an off-menu option. Like if you're looking to buy 1,000 of these, you can buy the M1 and save a couple $100 per unit, which is not insignificant. But I don't know. There's a good chance that they could just change the name and just sort of abandon the MacBook Air line. But I think MacBook is just... I mean, I don't know. Apple's done some crazy things. They've brought back MagSafe. They've brought back different names. So I'm not going to say it's not possible.
PowerBook.
But I think that MacBook is it's not going to come back anytime soon, unfortunately.
Yeah,
so we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter here or there because the product is going to be the same either way. It's just a naming scheme. So the product looks great. I'm super excited to get this. Like, this is definitely a computer I'm going to be getting my wife, and when my parents need a computer, I'm probably going to be recommending it. You know, that it's that kind of computer where it seems like you're just going to recommend it to whoever needs a laptop and they want an Apple laptop. This is the way to go. And honestly, in my mind, if everything from the rumors is true, which we're going to be talking about rumors a little bit more in a second, but let's just say it's all true. I mean, it might even kill the iPad for me in my mind for most tests. Because right now, it's like when I want a thin and light laptop, I go for the iPad Pro. But a thin and light MacBook Air with this cool design, I don't know, might be speaking to me a little bit more.
And the M2 processor inside and a mini LED display. There's a lot of appeal with this laptop. I also think it's cool that Apple is bringing mini LED tech to not just their high-end products, but also to the low-end stuff as well, or I guess lower end. The MacBook Air is still expensive, but cool to see that as well. And I'm all in for the news, and I think it looks great. MagSafe's going to be there too. USB-C. Great computer for most people.
Here's another question, though, semi-related. Are they going to keep around, or how much longer are they going to keep around the M1 MacBook Pro with Touch Bar? Because they're still selling that, even though the new MacBook Pros are out. That has
got to go. I think there's got to be a cost thing that maybe some enterprise customers or education customers are buying these in bulk, but it just makes more sense for them to quietly just have that as a contact us if you're interested in it, but there's just no reason to have that in the lineup, especially now because the new chips are so much better. The new design language is obviously a big deal, and they're going to bring that to the MacBook Air, so obviously they're going to stick with that notch and that stuff like that. It just seems confusing and sort of crowds the space a little bit to have that there. I see no reason why that exists beyond 2022. It's got to be next year. They've got to just get rid of that thing and move on. We've got the 14-inch and 16-inch model. That's probably just how it's going to be moving forward.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think it's much more likely that they keep around the M1 MacBook Air instead of the MacBook Pro. No reason to have both, especially once these new ones come out. When are we going to see this? It's like anywhere between now and forever. There's so many rumors about when we're going to see this MacBook Air. It could be, there was rumors it was going to be in November, but that's not happening. Then there was rumors that it's going to come out in March, maybe April. I mean, who knows at this point? I say March, though. That's my guess.
My bet right here, spring event, first Apple event of the year, whatever they call it, spring-loaded version 2, whether it's March or April. I feel like that's going to be the Mac Focus event where at least we get the M2 and the MacBook Air. That's my prediction. Calling it now, November 22nd. Calling it.
So you're saying spring, so either March, April, May, something in there.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that makes the most sense. Yeah. What else are we going to see at that event, though? What else do you think we might see there?
I was putting the list for that video together today. By the time you listen to this, the video next week on the Apple Circle will be what this rumored spring event will be. So give you a little spoiler here. I think what it is going to be, I don't know. But what it could be are 6 products. So 3 new Macs. So we could see MacBook Air, Mac Mini, iMac Pro, though iMac Pro is a little bit of a stretch, but I'm just going to throw it in there. We could see an iPad update because the last spring event was iPad Pro, and then iPhone SE. That was also a spring 2020 update. Would be a nice little bookend to a spring event. So that's sort of my list of what we could see at the next major Apple event of 2022.
The iPhone SE 2, the one that we have now, that was just like a press release, right?
Press release? Yeah. That was like March 2020 or April 2020.
Wasn't that the week of press releases? Where they did a bunch of them?
That was as the world was collapsing, they did a blitz of press releases. I think with the iPad Pro, which was also a press release, the next day or the day before, whatever, there was the iPhone SE 2. And looks
AirPods
like every
Pro?
2 years, AirPods Max, right?
One of them. No, AirPods Pro was the year before.
No, AirPods Max AirPods Pro was a press release, but that was October 2019.
That was a different time, yeah.
So I know at least that week, I think the rumor was back then there were going to be 3 announcements. It was just 2. It was iPad
Something
Pro.
like that, yeah.
It was iPad Pro. It was this Magic Keyboard case. I don't know if it was the same day.
Yeah, and trackpad
and then we got
that,
iPhone SE 2. So it looks like every 2 years in the spring, Apple will give us a new iPhone SE, and that should be iPhone SE 3. So that's my predictions. I think it's going to be, there's a good chance that event could just be Mac focused. I could see him totally just doing MacBook Air, M2, and then maybe Mac Mini. Or we see them sort of branch out and they do MacBook Air, maybe Mac Mini, iPhone SE, and then iPad. But the thing with the iPad is, not only is the iPad Pro already really good, and it could get some updates, but there's been so little information on what we could see. I don't even know if there's necessarily a need to rush that out or if it would happen. So I'm more skeptical about that happening. I think MacBook Air is for sure much more of a done deal than anything else, but that's kind of my ideas of what we could see. That at least is more ready than the other stuff that we'll probably see later in the summer or in the fall, like iPhone 14, AirPods Pro 2, and stuff like that.
Yeah, I agree. For the iPads, all the rumors that we have heard, which are very few and far between, like there's one that maybe it's going to have like a glass back so it supports wireless
So
charging, which
weird.
I don't know if I buy that. Like an entire glass back, maybe. I can. It's not like I can't see it, but I don't believe it. Or at least not right now. Maybe in the future. But okay, well, let's just say that's true. That's still press release material. Like that's not that big of a change, considering last time they did a press release for the iPad Air, or sorry, iPad Pro. This was before they did the M1 chip and the mini LED display. That was a press release for the iPad Pro, and the only thing they changed was the camera, and they added the LiDAR scanner, which,
Right.
if you think about it, maybe is a big reason to talk about it, but they didn't. And adding like a glass back with wireless charging, unless they completely redesign everything, seems kind of like in the same vein. Like, yeah, it's a big feature technically, but is it really worth an event? I don't think so. And the same kind of goes for all the other iPads. Like the iPad Air, I don't think we've heard anything about a redesign or anything like that, like nothing. So I could see a processor bump or something like that pretty easily.
Right.
I mean, I can also see the 11-inch iPad getting mini LED. Again, press release material. Like these are all very easy, or at the very least, like they talk about it for 5 minutes on stage or something like that. I don't think it's a big deal. And I agree with the SE. The SE is kind of the same thing. Processor bump, probably better camera, but maybe not even better camera hardware, but probably just better processing. Maybe, I don't know.
There were some
it.
wild theories on the SE3 that originally it's going to be the body of the iPhone 11, so 2 cameras, but it's going to get Touch ID in the power button. It's going to get a hole punch notch at the top. It's going to have 5G. All that sounds great, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen.
No.
Especially, why would the iPhone SE get a hole punch before
That's
the
my
iPhone
thinking.
14?
Yeah.
So it seems like all rumors these days point to a very small update, like you just said, Matt, to the iPhone SE3. 5G support, I guess.
Yeah, that's
cool.
supposed to be coming still, yeah.
$400. You're getting a really solid iPhone, maybe the new processor inside, but still same design. So if you're in the market for an iPhone SE, wait a bit.
Yeah, I think that rumored like iPhone 11 style is supposed to be coming next year. So not 2022, but 2023 for the iPhone SE 4. And I think it's going to be called, or the rumor is iPhone SE Plus, which is kind of weird because I don't think there's supposed to be a smaller version. I think it's just one version at this point, at least. So I don't know what's going on with those rumors. But yeah, as of now, it's just the same old. I don't think we're going to see any Pro products at this event. Rumored events, the spring event, whatever that is. I don't think we're going to see any of that there. I think they'll save that for WWDC.
Yeah, the only one I could think of is, well, what's so weird is the iMac Pro. That one I could definitely see them saving for WWDC.
Yeah.
But the Mac Mini continues to be in limbo because at this point, I don't know if they're just going to do, this is the new Mac Mini, and you can option it from an M2 up to an M1 Pro or an M1 Max. It's very confusing. We've talked about this before, so I don't know what else there is to add, but that one is like the one wild card that it's like closer to being done than some other projects, but where does it fit in? Is it a Pro product? Is it a consumer product? I guess we're just gonna have to wait and see what happens.
Yeah, because it's supposed to have colors, but then it might have the Pro processors, so it's like it's confusing. I think what'll end up happening is maybe here's a prediction that may or may not happen. Like at the spring event, they come out with a new Mac Mini. It's a little small form factor. It looks cool. It's like everyone wants it. Comes in the colors, all that kind of stuff. It's got the M2 processor, and then that's it. And then when they go to WWDC, they want to have a blowout because this is kind of the end of their transition. WWDC, where they have all the developers. I guess they'll probably still do a virtual event at that point. That's my guess, but let's just say all the developers are watching. Would they blow it out? We get a preview, sneak peek of the Mac Pro. We get the iMac Pro, which I'm not convinced is going to be called the iMac Pro, but no, actually, now I think about it, I think it will be called the iMac Pro because of the line distinction like we talked about with the MacBooks. And then they might even do like by the way, we're putting the M1 or M1 Max, M1 Pro, or whatever version it is at that point into the Mac Mini, and it comes in space gray now. I could see them maybe doing something like that.
Do you think that Apple will put a cap on the Mac Mini so it doesn't, in a sense, compete with the iMac Pro? I was thinking about this the other day. I could see them limiting the Mac Mini to the M1 Pro, which is still really good, but there's like an M1 Pro ceiling, and if you want the Max, you have to go up to the iMac, because that would be sort of crazy that if you could configure a Mac Mini with an M1 Max, same specs as a MacBook Pro or an iMac Pro, and I feel like that thing with all those ports and all that power for considerably less money than the iMac and the MacBook Pro because you're not getting display. What a steal that would be. But I wonder if they would. I guess because they control the whole line, they can kind of go either way. But do you think they would limit that Mac Mini because they don't want people going all out on that Mac Mini? Or do you think they'll sort of give everybody the option, hey, you want the highest end chip in the iMac Pro? Have at it. You want it in the Mac Mini? Go ahead. Where do you think that lands?
Yeah, I don't know. I have like two ideas about this. Either one is like maybe it is the same chips, but kind of similar to the 14-inch and the 16-inch. Maybe you can't get all the performance out of that Max, even though it is the Max. Like, you know, the 16-inch MacBook Pro has the high performance mode. Maybe you can't do that in the Mac Mini for whatever reason. I could see that happening. Or I can see them just going all out and it's like, you know what? This is like we make our own hardware now or software. I guess they make everything now. We make everything now. Like the whole point of that is that we make the best computers for whatever task you need. So if you need a Mac Mini, we're not going to hinder you because we want you to buy the computer that's best for you. And Apple is in a position where they could probably afford to do that, where I don't think so many people are going to skip out on the iMac just because you can get similar performance in a Mac Mini, because the iMac is still going to have that mini LED display. It's going to have speakers. It's going to have a cool enclosure. It's going to have all that stuff. So there's still very much a reason to get the iMac. So I hope that they just put it in all the computers and you choose what works best for you, because that would be awesome. I mean, that's something that you kind of wish all manufacturers would do. It's just like, let me get what I want. Like, let me have a MacBook Air with all this power. And they kind of did that, you know? So it's like, I can see that happening, but my cynical part of my brain is like, they're going to hinder it in some way.
Man, an M1 Max Mac Mini sounds so good. And considering the price, I mean, what, under $2,000 maybe, or like around $2,000? So you're saving at least $1,000 and you got all that power. That's so cool. So cool.
Sounds good.
So we talked about leaks, Matt, but let's go a little. Are we going drilling down to the deeps, or are we going more high concept? We're going one way. We're gonna go a little wider here. Let's talk about sort of leaks in general. So we talked about all these leaks about the MacBook Air and the iMac Pro and the iPhone SE and stuff like that. But how do Apple products leak? And there are multiple ways that other tech products leak. Samsung pictures just get posted of the actual device online. Sometimes just the actual physical product leaks from other companies. But Apple is very special because
it themselves.
Yeah, Google will leak it themselves. Apple is so meticulous and so careful about every little thing they do, but the stuff still leaks out. So I thought we could talk a little bit about how Apple products leak. And I mean, I got some thoughts on this. We've kind of broken it down in like sort of the three ways that Apple products leak. But in general, do you have any insight you can share with the audience as the two of us sort of live and breathe these leaks?
Yeah.
For those sort of who are outside of the obsession of Apple leaks, how do sort of these leaks work, and how does information spread from Mac rumors to YouTube to Twitter? Like, how do these leaks really happen?
Yeah, so like you said, there's a few different tiers, but I think the easiest way to kind of explain it is to just keep in mind what Apple is. Apple is a huge company. They have presence all over the world in different countries. They have thousands upon thousands of employees, not to mention, I'm sure they have contractors that they work with that aren't directly employed by Apple. Well, obviously they do. I think Foxconn is one of those who designs and who manufactures a lot of these products. So those are companies that they work with that are not part of Apple. So when you just think about the scope, you have to really remember that there's a person at every part of that chain. And at some point, there's going to be a weak spot, whether that's in the design room at Apple itself or whether it's on the assembly line in China. At some point, there's going to be a little bit of a leak, and that's typically where these come from. Now, like you said, there's a few different areas where they come from, and I think the main three are, you've got the analysts. So these are people who kind of just analyze what's going on with the company. Like, it would make sense for them to release such and such product next year because they need to hit these financial goals, that kind of thing. There's people that cover the company and really know what's going on behind the scenes, even if they don't necessarily. A lot of times they do have behind the scenes knowledge, but they don't even necessarily need that. Just they can do it from a forward facing, just analyzing the data. So that's one way. Then you have the journalists, which are kind of in the same vein. Like they can really analyze what's going on and almost just guess. Like we have been doing this. I don't know if I would call ourselves journalists, but we're kind of like half journalists. And we kind of just know based on track records, based on everything, that next year they are going to be releasing the next version of the iPhone, and they will likely be doing it in September. You know, that kind of thing. Like it's just kind of our own intuitions and track record based on what Apple's doing. And then you have the actual leakers who, I guess you could call them journalists. I would say so, but they, well, I guess there's two different leakers. You have the actual leakers, the people who leak the stuff, but they don't necessarily report it to anyone. And then you have the people that are in contact with those leakers who then report it to you or to us in the public. And that's kind of encompasses everything. So you get all the way from we're kind of just guessing based on what Apple has done in the past and what we think they'll do in the future, all the way down to concrete leaks from people who are in the know. And that is kind of where they all come from. But where are the juicy ones coming from?
You know, also, I'd say that I think we can qualify ourselves as Apple analysts. We are very in tune with Apple and all that stuff. So the juicy stuff comes from a combination of things. And I think that one of the misconceptions many people have is, okay, so someone in the design room at Apple is like leaking the information. I'd say most of the time, probably the vast majority of the time, the leak itself doesn't come from an Apple employee at all, but someone in the supply chain or someone with their ear to the ground on the supply chain, so to speak. So one of the people we talk about all the time is Ming-Chi Kuo. If you think of Apple, you have undoubtedly heard that name. He is an Apple analyst, meaning some of these people are individuals, but a lot of them work for companies like Barclays, Goldman Sachs, stuff like that. These companies analyze many different companies, Apple included, and they analyze Apple from many levels. They look at sort of their cash holdings, where they're spending that money, what investments they're making, what companies they're acquiring. They're looking at sort of the supply chain, who are Apple's partners, why is Apple working with this company, not that company. And then a lot of these analysts are able to build sources within the supply chain. So, hey, I'm analyst Robert. I have a source at a supplier in, I don't know, somewhere overseas that, hey, Apple is ordering 5 million LCD panels, or hey, this supplier has a large order from an undisclosed vendor who is buying 10 million mini LED panels. They're able to sort of get information from people, different links in that chain to get this information. So Ming-Chi Kuo is able to know from suppliers overseas that, hey, this company, or a lot of times Apple, put in an order for, micro LED technology. They're testing it. This is probably going to go into this product next year or something like that. It's all these different sources in the supply chain. You also have journalists, like Matt said, and a lot of juicy details. Well, I got to take that back. I feel like Mark Gurman, sometimes he's breaking information, which he's a journalist, he's at Bloomberg, he's got a really great track record. He's breaking the information, but a lot of times, if he confirms a piece of information, like if he confirms something that John Prosser reported, that usually gives a little bit more weight and a little bit more status to that rumor, a little bit more credibility. And then you have the leakers who, more often than not lately, have been giving us a lot of the juicy details, like Dylan, DKT. There's some other like random Twitter accounts that you don't know if these people are Apple employees or they're suppliers or someone connected, but sometimes they'll just post on Twitter anonymously all this like information, like Dylan gave specs for the new iMac Pro and stuff like that. So it's like a combination of many different things, but the main theme here is that most of the time, the vast majority of the time, the phone does not leak at a bar in Cupertino. Someone doesn't take a picture of it and share it. It's like people way, way down in the supply chain that get a little bit of information here and a little bit of info here, and you're able to put that together with someone who knows Apple that can kind of paint a broader picture. It's a little confusing, but that's sort of, again, like Matt said, the three sort of sources of how all those leaks sort of come out and sort of surface online.
Yeah, exactly. And, the way to think of it is, obviously Apple is as secretive as they can be, and I forgot I don't know if they have a name for it, but I remember a little while ago they had like this task force where they were gonna double down on the leakers and make sure nothing ever happened. They even said that they were kind of gonna go after journalists a little bit, like the journalists like John Prosser, those kind of leakers who leak a lot of their products, and they were what was the details on that? Do you remember that?
There was one employee who was leaking information. There was a quid pro quo scenario where an actual Apple employee was leaking information to a journalist because they wanted the journalist to give them favorable coverage on their startup or something like that. There have been rare cases where Apple has gone after individual employees, but more often than not, no one wants their name associated with any kind of high-profile case, and Apple employees usually aren't the ones doing the leaking because they know that if they are caught leaking information,
it's over.
It's really bad. And Apple keeps putting more and more safeguards into place to make sure they know exactly who has info on what project and how much they know. And I think at the source, the closer you get to the source, the more Apple is able to control this. But it's the people further away from the source, down the supply chain,
Exactly.
so to speak, those deeper links in the chain. Those are people that even just with a little tidbit of information are able to sort of give the markets a lot to react to.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it just makes more sense logically. Like, obviously, Apple can lock it down a lot. But when you have, let's say, for these AirPods 3 that just were released, there was rumors that those were ready to go for almost a year now, right? Like, it's been a long time that those were ready to go and even were being manufactured, which what that means is Apple was making them in a factory in China, I believe is where they make those. So there's dozens, hundreds, thousands of people who are working on that. And at some point, it's just going to leak. Someone's going to say something to someone. And it's not enough where we get the whole picture, like we know everything. But it's enough where maybe we'll get a rogue picture. Maybe we know that they're manufacturing them. Or we'll get a feature leak for one of the components because this particular leaker on the supply chain makes the speaker or something, you know? So it's like, that's really how it is. And the fact that Apple is so big, there's so many people doing that we can actually build a pretty good picture about what that's going to be. Not only from the products that Apple already makes, and we know they are going to most likely update, but also just from some of the new products. And yeah, it's like every single part of this, the analysts, the journalists, and the leakers, they all come together to really give us a full picture of what we're going to see. And I think a good way to say that is like the Apple glasses, the VR glasses that we're expecting, because from the analyst's point of view and the journalist's point of view, well, they put LiDAR into their phones, so we can only speculate that that is for AR because Apple says that. They're really pushing into AR for whatever reason, which doesn't really make too much sense now. But then the analysts can see where they're spending their money and what they're really focusing on. And obviously they're pushing into AR. And then the leakers will leak, oh, Apple's working on this thing. They're in test development of these VR glasses. And then John Prosser will get a leak from inside Apple that shows him a picture of what these glasses may look like. And that whole picture comes together, and now we know they're going to be making these Apple glasses. It's just a matter of when.
Perfectly summarized. It's interesting how the leaks used to be a little bit more prolific in recent years,
definitely.
and these days we really don't get a rogue picture. You don't get a rogue picture of the iPhone most times. You don't get the MacBook Pro. And I guess other interesting point is, I guess maybe there's a fourth category that's very rare, and that is hackers, because apparently a lot of the MacBook Pro schematics and all that stuff leaked from a hacking group that had hacked into a supplier who Apple was contracted to work with, that was either supplying or building parts for the MacBook Pro. So sometimes that happens, but in a lot of cases, it's just little bits of info, like Matt said. It's, hey, Apple ordered a lot of this size display. Or, hey, Apple is ordering this type of 5G cell modem. It's little bits of pieces that, when put together, provide a really clear picture. And especially for like recent iPhone launches, all we've gotten has been sort of little bits of info. They're going to add LiDAR. They're going to do this. They're going to do that. They're going to add LTPO backplane technology. Samsung is ramping up a new production line specifically for Apple. That came from a leak from someone in the supply chain that then lets us know that ProMotion is coming. It's like all these sort of different sources working together, or I guess if you, the reader, can put all these little news nuggets together, you could sort of understand how Apple's working. And that's really been sort of the way we've gotten a lot of the info. Now, in some cases, you have people like John Prosser, who's able to get incredibly good info from unidentified sources who can, in some cases, give us a lot of knowledge. Like with AirTags, for example, we got whatever John Prosser got, whether it was pictures or CAD files, he made third-party renders of exactly what AirTags are going to be like in AirPods Max and stuff like that. The Apple leaking community is just so fascinating, and it's so cool to see. I guess I don't know if cool is the right word. It's fascinating to see these random new Twitter accounts pop up that are giving us accurate leak after accurate leak, and who are building their credibility and just seemingly came out of nowhere. They now know everything about future Apple products.
Yeah, exactly. It's so interesting because the Twitter accounts that have popped up are really random. Like they're nobodies in the grand scheme of like Twitter. Like they're not blue checks or anything like that. They just suddenly tweet out every spec and it's exactly right when the product comes out, and it's like, oh, interesting. So I mean, in my opinion, those are probably people that work at Apple or are extremely close to someone at Apple who will then tell them the stuff. But another angle to this, which you briefly mentioned there, that is I think really interesting in the last few years, is this real big trend on getting these extremely accurate renders put together based off of these leaks. Because on one hand, it almost feels like we know everything about these products, but when you really just distill down the leaks, we actually haven't seen that much. But because these renders are so good, it almost makes it feel like we've seen all these products before.
Renders have, I feel like, totally changed the game, especially when it comes to, I guess, not only YouTube, but like Mac Rumors and other like Apple News websites as well. People love a good picture. They love a good video. And remember back in the day, it was like you'd have like one like super pixelated concept from like some person who like made this really cool thing. Like that's the same picture everybody uses. Now you have people, and a lot of times younger people who are like still in high school or middle school, who are so good at this computer modeling and rendering that there's new leaks and rumors and renders made from those all the time. There was someone who emailed Apple Circle, I think he was 12 or 13. I don't know if I'm right on that, but someone super young who made some renders we put in a recent video. They were really good. I know one of the render people on Twitter, Apple Tomorrow, I think he's in high school. He's making some cool renders. A lot of these people, I know, of course, Renders by Ian, I think he's like 17 and he's making some killer renders, and he's working with John Prosser, a concept creator who is making great renders. So many people who are who can learn this stuff. Now these days we've got these products that don't exist and we know little info about. We can see them in every angle, every lighting condition, every color, because of sort of the magic of sort of these computer modeling programs. And that's been really cool over the past couple of years, is we're no longer limited to like one spy shot or like one like very crude like sketch. We now have like these like renders and like these full animations that show us and really get us excited about what Apple is working on. And I think in most cases, they're fairly accurate. The iPhone stuff is always super accurate. And even the recent MacBook Pros, those concepts and renders are pretty close to the real deal.
Yeah, I guess the design of it was slightly off, but all the important stuff was almost exactly the same. Like it was pretty good. And then because I was thinking, when do we actually see the product in like a leaked image? And it's not that often. It happens every once in a while. Like we got the image of the AirPods Pro 2 case and some of the earbuds. And it's like, okay, yeah, but that's kind of boring. Like, I guess technically it is a picture of it, probably, but it's kind of boring. But like, we haven't really seen like a picture of the iPhone, like the actual iPhone, for a long time. We see like maybe the glass, maybe the camera module or something like that, but not the actual phone. I'm trying to think back to when maybe the last time we did. I know obviously the infamous time was the iPhone 4. That was the biggest leak of probably all time. I'm sure you know it, but just to recap the story, back when the iPhone 4 was out, I mean, you got to remember, this is the days where technology was rapidly advancing. So the jump from the iPhone 3GS to the iPhone 4 was huge. We got the first Retina display. We got a radically new design with premium materials, glass, and stainless steel. We had the first camera system that was really focused on being good instead of just being a camera on the back of your phone. Like, this was really what the start of the camera revolution on smartphones was. Not to mention, it had a front-facing camera. It had everything that you kind of know of as an iPhone. Started with the iPhone 4, and it was left in a bar. Stolen or left? Was there ever consensus on that?
I don't know if there was ever a definitive answer, but some say left, some say stolen. So who knows?
Yeah. So either way, Gizmodo got their hands on it, and that was a whole fiasco. And we got early pictures of it, and you could you could see in some of the pictures that it had a really high density screen, so we knew it was going to be high resolution. Obviously, all the different design of it was crazy compared to the iPhone 3GS. Like, that was a huge leak, and I mean, for us in the community, it was cool to see early. For Gizmodo, that did not work out very well. But yeah, that's kind of the last time I can remember where it was like a bombshell. Like, this is the new product. Every other time, it's kind of like one little component or a render or something like that.
That was undoubtedly one of the biggest leaks ever. And I guess to give some perspective for those who weren't around or following tech back then, trying to think what a good example of that is today. I guess think of the iPhone 14. So it came out, I think the leak happened in April and the phone launched in June. So think let's backtrack a bit. So the iPhone launches in September. Let's say in June, some big YouTube channel, like Everything Apple Pro, for example, I'd love to say Apple Circle, but whoever, someone gets, let's say Apple Circle, we get the iPhone 14 and we can show it off in every angle, every photo, we can take videos of it. It was just you couldn't believe that Apple, a secretive company that was so focused on this stuff, that they let it happen. And I think that I'm sure things changed internally who gets access and when. The other thing is people go, well, how'd that happen? Well, apparently this was at a bar very close to Cupertino, so it's near the mothership. And also, these phones have to be tested, so they have to be used in the real world, even though these days they could probably be really artificially tested. I don't know if they have to go in the real world. And also, it was in a case that made it look like a 3GS. So there's still disputes to this day whether someone knew it was a prototype and specifically pickpocketed it, or the story goes that someone found it and then they sort of realized, oh, this is a weird case, and they took it off and it was something different. That could be debated forever, but long story short, it was a crazy leak, changed everything, and Gizmodo has since been blacklisted forever from ever going to any Apple event. The only other huge leak that I can think of in recent years was actually Apple themselves. Remember with the XS Max that year, the day before the event, 9 to 5 Mac found some internal live stream and they took pictures of when Apple was running the promo videos. Those actually turned out to be true. And that was Apple themselves apparently testing a live stream, running through some of those promo videos. However, I don't know, they never shared details, but 9 to 5 Mac took some screenshots, posted it, and that was the XS Max. I think at the time it was the Apple Watch Series 3 or whatever it was. Those were also true. So that was another bad leak from Apple, but I can't remember the last time there has been a physical Apple product in the wild, because these days, and rightfully so, a lot of people like John Prosser want to protect their sources and protect themselves, so they just make concepts and renders based off of real photos, and they never share those public real photos because it's more of a liability for them than anything else.
Yeah, exactly. It really just comes down to these are real products, so you're going to have to test them. So at some point it's going to leak. And, every year we get Apple's testing the A16 processor because we got a Geekbench score from some unknown processor or a MacBook or something like that. So it's it kind of goes back to the other thing, though. It's it's just little peanuts, little things that you just pick up along the way and really give you a full picture of everything that's going on. But it's always exciting. It seems the leaks, I think the renders are cool, and it's really cool to see what the products might look like. But at the same time, it almost makes it feel less exciting because it's we've seen the products before. It's not that different. Or on the other hand, like the leaks actually aren't that good and it's kind of boring.
It's just like as technology gets better and better and we can do these renders and stuff, I mean, it's kind of happening now where we can make photo and video realistic models of the iPhone 14 before it even comes out. So it's November now. By June and July, we're going to have renders of the iPhone 14 from every single angle, and you'll know exactly what that phone looks like before it launches, just because the bigger Apple gets and the more iPhones they produce, and I guess any product they produce, the harder and harder it is for them to keep it under wraps. And try as they might, it's becoming increasingly more difficult. But I guess to their credit, we have yet to see real photos of the VR headset. Still don't know what that really looks like. The Apple Car is probably still like not even close to production, so probably wouldn't see that anyways. But Apple does a pretty good job, all things considered, of keeping things as guarded as possible. But when you have a community of obsessive people like Matt and I and many others who want to know this stuff, there is a business around Apple leaks, and eventually stuff will leak out in one form or another, and then it just becomes, it becomes news and everybody's covering it.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess there's really just one thing you can say is that we're going to be covering the leaks. You want to hear the latest ones? Listen to the podcast, watch the Apple Circle channel. They're never going to stop. So it's just always going to be interesting. I'm sure at some point we're going to get one of these huge leaks, massive dumps of whatever new product. I wouldn't be surprised if it's the Apple glasses because I don't know. I just have a feeling we might get a leak of that before it actually comes out. We've gotten some potential leaks like with renders and stuff, but like actual leak, I think we might actually see that for those just because it's such a complicated product. Like they got to be testing it in the real world in some way, shape or form. I think it might happen. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much all there is to say about leaking. I think before we wrap up, let's go ahead and go to some of our user submitted questions. We have actually got a voicemail this week and we got a text question. I think we'll talk about that one first. This is from Unknown, but basically talking about how MediaTek, who makes processors, just released some of their new processors and they have Bluetooth 5.3. Kind of basically saying they wish the M2 will have better Wi-Fi and Bluetooth support. And yeah, that's kind of interesting because like the new MacBook Pros don't have Wi-Fi 6E. They only have Wi-Fi 6, even though 6E has been out for a little while now. Apple does that a lot. They don't necessarily go to the newest standard as fast as they can. I'm not exactly sure why. I think my guess is just because the length of time they've been in development for all these products. Like maybe at that point, Wi-Fi 6E probably just wasn't a thing or wasn't quite ready. So they just go with whatever's the most ready at the time. I don't think there's anything nefarious about it necessarily.
That always seems to happen too, and everybody always asks, "Oh, why is the Qualcomm X65 is out? Why is Apple using the 64?" And like you said, just you explained it, Apple's so far removed from that new stuff because they're working on this and testing and debugging so many months in the past that they just can't make a flip of a switch and put that in there and be good to go. But what we will see is, I think that in 2023, the rumor is that that's going to be the first year we see the Apple owned cell modem, because remember that Apple bought Intel cell modem division for like $1 billion a few years ago. And as Apple can make more and more of their own chips and processors and stuff like that, the better they can be flexible and also plan ahead and have this latest and greatest cutting edge tech inside. So I think that in the next couple of years, as Apple owns more of these other processes and other parts of the phone, we're going to see Apple continue to add more advanced and more of the latest Bluetooth stuff and Wi-Fi stuff and stuff like that, 5G bands and stuff like that into the iPhone. Not going to happen this year because they're still on sort of at the mercy of Qualcomm Snapdragon, but wait until next year and the story might just change.
Yeah. And then we also have our first, at least since we've been back, we have our first audio message. So let's go ahead and roll that and then we'll talk about it.
Hi, this is ASAP in Albany, Oregon. Hey, I have a question to see if anybody has advice. I was just listening to the recent podcast on HomeKit and all that stuff. I have two HomePod minis and an Apple TV. I currently have the HomePod mini set as the hub or the controller for all my lights. And basically what happens is you tell Siri to turn on the light or turn it off, and it just says, hey, I'm having trouble with the connection. When I go to my control center on my phone, I can switch it on and off. So there's nothing wrong with, I guess, there's nothing wrong with it. My phone can turn it on and off, but Siri on the HomePod doesn't. Just wondering if you have any advice for that. I don't know if it's my Wi-Fi router, if it's my HomePod minis, or what it is, but yeah, just seeing if you have any advice. Thanks.
Thanks for the question. Yeah, I mean, this is kind of, we were kind of praising HomeKit last week, and we both have switched to it. And it's kind of a hit or miss thing because when it works, it's excellent. But when it doesn't work, there's really no way to troubleshoot it beyond just turning it on and off again. Like, that's about as good as it gets. That's probably the worst thing about HomeKit. And it's honestly not even a HomeKit problem. It's a everything problem when it comes to smart home devices, whether you're on Zigbee or what's the other one? The new one that Curve? No, it's not Curve. It's like Nest? No. Well, it's like it's built in for HomeKit too, but it's like a special protocol that they use. Whatever, I can't remember the name. That's not important. But yeah, that's kind of the biggest issue with HomeKit in general. I will say though, you mentioned the HomePod was not being able to connect to the internet, but you could still control your lights. That I did have a problem with my HomePod, my original HomePod. You said you have a HomePod mini, but I had the original HomePod, and it would just randomly disconnect from the internet. And everything that I saw was that it was a actual hardware issue. So I took it in and they replaced it for me. So that might be it. Worth probably taking it into an Apple store to get serviced if you can, because that seemed to have been a known issue. I'm not sure if it's on the minis, but that happened with my original one.
It's like you just said, one of the downfalls of HomeKit. I love Apple, but they don't give you a lot of options, so it's kind of hard to diagnose. I don't know if it's your wireless router. I guess you could check and see maybe how often new IPs are getting assigned to your devices, but I don't think that should affect it. The problem is if you wipe the HomePod mini and you reset, one of the issues with the HomeKit ecosystem is like once you remove the hub, it like takes everything out and you have to like re-add everything. So before you do that, I would try factory resetting your router, seeing if that sort of helps things sort of stabilize and everything gets a new IP and everything's sort of fresh again, and see if that works. And beyond that, like Matt said, see what they could do about the HomePod. See maybe if you factory reset the HomePod, as much as I hate to say it, sometimes starting from scratch might kind of help kick things back in the right direction. Just one of the hard things is when it works great, but when it doesn't work, it's so hard to diagnose that stuff. And I just I don't know if I can offer any assistance, because in my situation, if I was in your shoes, if I was doing that myself, I'd start with the router, then I go with the HomePod and just knock on wood and hope it works, because it's frustrating. Yeah. It's frustrating when there's no clear action, there's no clear answer, and I don't know what to do. And that's sort of the best thing and worst thing about HomeKit is if it works, it works. If it doesn't, you're sort of just banging your head against the wall.
Yeah, and there's like no one you can talk to, because if you talk to whoever makes the lights, they're going to be like, oh, it's a problem with the HomePod. And you talk to Apple, then they're going to be like, oh, it's a problem with your lights. So there's no win-win situation here. You're going to end up just having to troubleshoot it yourself and like hope it works. And really, I mean, it could be as simple as, for whatever reason, you have your HomePod in the corner and it just doesn't receive signal there. It could be that simple. So I would just experiment with all that before you reset everything. But yeah, one of those options might fix it, but honestly, we might not. We're not being that much help here.
I will say, as weird as it might sound, it might be worth it, again, just shy of having to reset everything. Maybe try what we talked about last week with the Homebridge and the Hoobs. Not that you don't have HomeKit compatible devices, but if you could sort of run them through an intermediary, if I can speak, if you could run it through something else that maybe can handle any kind of IP address changes or any kind of disconnects, maybe running it through one of those systems and then re-adding it into HomeKit might solve the connection issue again. It's just kind of a shot in the dark, but I would try that because that's pretty easy to do. I know LifeX you mentioned, those will work on sort of the Homebridge system. So try that and see. Again, it's a little bit of a roundabout way to do it, but that might just solve your connection issues. At least I hope it does.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one, but hopefully you get it fixed. If not, well, sorry, we didn't help too much. But thank you so much for sending in that message. We really appreciate it. It's always nice to be able to at least try to help if we can. But yeah, if you want to submit your questions, we have that hotline once again. The number for that is 949-354-3508. And you can leave us a voicemail, leave us a text, and we will answer it here on the podcast. But I think that is it. It's always fun to talk about new leaks. I'm always excited about what will be coming out. But yeah, have a good holiday if you're here in the U.S. And if not, enjoy your early episode because this came out on Wednesday.
We'll be back to a regularly scheduled Apple Circle podcast next week. Again, hit us up on the hotline. Subscribe to the YouTube channel if you like the video version. Leave us a rating in the podcast app because that would be very beneficial. We'd appreciate that. And enjoy your rest of the week. Enjoy your weekend. And we'll see you right back here next week on Friday for another episode of the Apple Circle podcast.